Hi and welcome. I'm Andy Miocz and you're watching A News. Here are the headlines. Brazilian specialists decoded the black boxes from the crashed Azerbaijan Airlines plane. US allows transactions with governing institutions in Syria despite sanctions. Dozens killed in a strong earthquake that hit Tibet. Thank you for tuning in. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has accused Russia of trying to cover up details surrounding the tragic plane crash of the Azerbaijan Airlines flight in late December. Aliyev made these remarks while meeting survivors and the victims' families.
Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev met with survivors and the families of the victims of the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crash, which occurred on the 25th of December. After the crash, Russia's President Vladimir Putin apologized to Aliyev for what the Kremlin called a tragic incident over Russia, in which the Azerbaijani Airlines plane crashed after Russian air defenses were fired against Ukrainian drones. In response to Russia's handling of the aftermath, Aliyev voiced his concerns about the lack of proper airspace closures and the failure to alert the flight crew.
Dekabrın 29'unda bildirdiğim bir məqamı bir daha diqqətinizə çatdırmaq istəyirəm. Grozny şəhərində kovyor əməliyyatı, yəni ki, hava sahəsinin bağlanması.
I would like to bring to your attention one point that I stated on the 29th of December. In Grozny, the kovyor operation, i.e., an operation to close the airspace, was announced after the plane was shot at from the ground. This once again shows that there are very serious criminal issues here. Usually, if there is a threat to the airspace of any country, the airspace of that country is immediately closed. This happens in all countries and has different names. In Russia, it is called kovyor operation. If there was a threat to Russian airspace, the captain of the plane should have been informed about it immediately. The airspace should have been closed immediately and the plane should have turned back. I should also note that about 10 days before the accident, a similar incident occurred near the city of Grozny. An Azal plane was turned back halfway. Why was the crew not warned about it this time? Naturally, the investigation will show this. I want to say again that the information we have is based on the truth.
Azerbaijan's president also criticized Russian state agencies for focusing on speculative theories, which he called a cover-up of the true causes.
I want to say again that the information we have is based on the truth. The cover-up of this incident by Russian state agencies and the focus on absurd theories causes surprise, regret, and rightful indignation. Innocent people died. I repeat that it is precisely thanks to the heroism of the pilots and crew members that about 30 people survived this accident, several of whom were seriously injured. I should also note that the majority of those killed in the accident were Azerbaijani citizens. At the same time, citizens of Russia and Kazakhstan also died. Citizens of Kyrgyzstan were injured.
Qəza nəticəsində ən çox həlak olan Azərbaycan vətəndaşlarıdır. Eyni zamanda Rusiya və Qazaxstan vətəndaşları da həlak olub. Qırğızstan vətəndaşları isə yaralanmışdır.
Aliyev highlighted the preliminary findings of the investigation, which suggest external interference, including electronic warfare and ground fire. He also stressed the critical role of the crew's professionalism, which saved the lives of many passengers.
Ekipaj üzvlərinin qəhrəmanlığı haqqında mən vida mərasimi zamanı
I spoke about the heroism of the crew members during the farewell ceremony.
bu doğrudan da
I want to say again that this is a truly great sacrifice. I said that most likely the pilots knew that they would not survive this accident. They were experienced pilots, and thanks purely to their professionalism, they managed to bring the plane, which was out of control, down somehow, even though it had to make an emergency landing. They were able to land the plane. The other members of the crew, the flight attendants, also showed composure. They showed great courage to prevent chaos on the plane.
indirebilmişler.
They also saw and knew what awaited them. They probably did not even hope that they would be able to get out of this situation safely. To behave with restraint, composure, and courage in such a situation, of course, once again demonstrates their high qualities, especially considering that two of the flight attendants were women.
Xüsusilə nəzərə alsaq ki, bələdçilərin ikisi qadınlar idi.
President Aliyev also expressed his condolences to the families of the victims, reaffirming Azerbaijan's commitment to ensuring justice. He insisted that the crash could have been avoided had the necessary precautions been taken to secure the airspace near Grozny.
Investigators have decoded the black boxes from the Azal flight that crashed near Aktau, Kazakhstan. The Brazilian Aeronautical Accidents Investigation and Prevention Center has completed analyzing the flight recorder data, and the results were sent to authorities in Kazakhstan. The December 25th crash claimed 38 lives, leaving 29 survivors. The flight en route from Baku to Grozny went down near Aktau. The investigation on the cause of the tragedy continues. Over in the U.S., the Congress formally certified President-elect Donald Trump's victory in the November 5th election, completing the final step before his January 20th inauguration. Vice President Kamala Harris, who lost to Trump in November, presided over the Senate session to certify the election results, which proceeded without incident. This stood in stark contrast to the January 6th of 2021, when a mob attacked the Capitol building. Security was heightened, with metal fences and police checkpoints at the Capitol set to remain in place until Trump's inauguration. A winter storm brought heavy snow and freezing temperatures to over 60 million people across the U.S. Indiana, Ohio, and the Mid-Atlantic are bracing for up to 30 centimeters of snow and icy conditions.
Indiana's first snowstorm of the year hit on Sunday, blanketing the state with heavy snow and freezing temperatures. The National Weather Service issued a winter storm warning through Monday evening, predicting snow accumulations of 15 to 23 centimeters, along with a glaze of ice. This storm affected over 60 million people across more than a dozen states, from Kansas to New Jersey, bringing snow, ice, and freezing conditions. Cincinnati, Ohio was particularly hard hit, with snowfall expected to reach 18 to 25 centimeters. Other major cities, including Indianapolis, Washington, and Philadelphia, closed schools in advance due to the storm's impact. The storm is moving toward the mid-Atlantic, with Washington, D.C. bracing for heavy snow and bitter cold as the U.S. Congress prepares to certify Donald Trump's election as president on Monday. Blizzard conditions were reported in Kansas and northwestern Missouri, where roads were covered in snow and ice, prompting warnings to avoid travel. Freezing rain in parts of Kentucky and West Virginia created hazardous ice accumulations. As the storm moves out, Arctic air will follow, with temperatures minus 12 to minus 6 degrees Celsius, below average across much of the East Coast and Great Plains. Several states, including Kansas and Kentucky, have declared states of emergency.
Louisiana has reported the first U.S. death from the H5N1 bird flu. Meanwhile, experts are urging flu shots to protect against seasonal influenza and potential infections.
The Louisiana Department of Health announced that a patient hospitalized with H5N1 bird flu has died, marking the first reported human death from the virus in the United States. The patient, over 65 years old with underlying health conditions, was hospitalized on December 18th after exposure to backyard chickens and wild birds. Since April, nearly 70 bird flu cases have been reported in the U.S., primarily among farm workers, but the risk to the public remains low. The outbreak, which started in 2022, has killed nearly 130 million birds and affected 917 dairy herds. While the current bird flu outbreak poses little risk to humans, health experts are encouraging flu shots to guard against seasonal influenza and reduce the risk of co-infection.
It's still a good time to get your flu shot. Flu shot's going to prevent not avian influenza, but seasonal influenza and the possibility of being co-infected with those viruses, which is really what we're more concerned in the long run, that this bird flu that we have spreading across the US right now has some kind of mutation or a reassortment event, which makes it more transmissible between people, which is what we have not seen yet.
Globally, more than 950 human cases of bird flu have been reported, with about half resulting in death, according to the World Health Organization.
U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein expressed optimism on progress of the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah. After meetings with Lebanese caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati and Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, Hochstein reaffirmed U.S. support for the agreement. Earlier, he visited Nakora in southern Lebanon to oversee the ceasefire implementation.
The same work that led to the withdrawal today of the Israeli military will continue. And therefore, that is what will enable the next phase, which we're now focused on, which is to withdraw from the next sector of territory, and then after that, the final one. So this is going according to the plan, maybe not according to exact expectations of everybody in Lebanon or Israel, but we have 20 days left to reach the 60 days. We are going to continue the same work that led to the successful deployment and withdrawal, or withdrawal and deployment.
Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of France's far-right National Front party, has died at the age of 96. His political career left a lasting impact on the French political landscape. Le Pen founded the National Front in 1972, championing nationalist ideals. He stunned France in 2002 by making it to the presidential runoff against Jacques Chirac. His daughter, Marine Le Pen, later rebranded the party as the National Rally, turning it into a major political force. Syria's new trade minister, Maher Khalil al-Hassan, said U.S. sanctions are blocking fuel and wheat imports, warning of a catastrophe unless they are lifted. Sanctions imposed during Assad's rule targeted his government and state institutions. The caretaker government, formed by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group after ousting Bashar al-Assad in December, has secured short-term supplies. Russia and Iran, once major suppliers of wheat and oil, halted support after Assad's ousting. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is poised to ease restrictions on humanitarian aid to Syria, allowing for more rapid delivery of basic supplies without fully lifting sanctions on the new government in Damascus. The limited step involves U.S. Treasury Department waivers for aid groups and companies offering essential services such as water, electricity, and other humanitarian supplies. But it falls short of a broader sanctions rollback. Washington remains cautious about lifting the sanctions imposed during Syria's 13-year-long civil war. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. wants assurances that the new leadership in Damascus will protect the rights of women and minorities. Damascus International Airport has resumed international flights following a month-long closure.
Syria's Damascus International Airport resumed international flights on January 7 following a closure in early December due to the ongoing conflict. The airport had been temporarily shut down on December 8 amid the fighting associated with the fall of President Bashar al-Assad's government. However, flight operations were gradually reinstated on December 17 after the political changes earlier that month. On January 7, a Qatar Airways flight landed at the airport, making the first international flight from the airline to Damascus in over 13 years. This return of international flights followed earlier smaller-scale operations by airlines such as Iran's Mirage Airlines and Syria's Cham Wings before the airport's closure. Employees had been preparing the airport for the resumption of international services. In addition to the return of international flights, a domestic flight between Damascus and Aleppo, Syria's second largest city, also took place, marking the first service between the two cities since the airport's closure.
At least 95 people have been confirmed dead and 130 are injured after a major earthquake struck a remote region of mountainous Tibet near Mount Everest. Tremors were also felt in Nepal and parts of India.
A powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake rocked the northern foothills of the Himalayas, with its epicenter located in Tingri, a rural Chinese county known as the northern gateway to the Everest region. The tremors, which reached neighboring countries, caused significant damage and loss of life. In Tibet's Latsi County, streets were covered in debris as buildings were destroyed and people were left injured. Nearly 100 people were confirmed dead and 100 others were injured on the Tibetan side, according to China's state-run news agency Xinhua. The U.S. Geological Service placed the quake's magnitude at 7.1. The tremors were also felt in Kathmandu, Nepal's capital. Residents fled their homes as the earthquake's effects reached nearly 400 kilometers away. The tremors were also felt in neighboring Bhutan and India, where buildings shook, though there were no immediate reports of significant damage or casualties in these regions. In Nepal, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority reported that the tremors were felt across 7 hill districts bordering Tibet. A series of aftershocks have hit China's Xinjiang Autonomous Region, and further tremors could be possible in the region, said the China Earthquake Network Center.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's casualties in the Kursk region have reached 38,000. with almost 15,000 of them being classified as, quote, irreversible. Zelensky said that the Kursk operation that began in August had successfully created a buffer zone, preventing Russian forces from advancing into critical areas of eastern Ukraine. Russia's National Guard released footage over the weekend claiming they repelled a Ukrainian offensive in the Kursk region. The Russian Defense Ministry also stated that their forces had disrupted Ukrainian attempts to breach their defenses. Protests in Georgia passed the 40-day mark. Demonstrations that began following the contested October election and subsequent halt to EU accession talks continued in Tbilisi on Orthodox Christmas.
While Orthodox Christians in Georgia are celebrating Christmas, the protests that began after the parliamentary elections held on October 26 and escalated due to the government's decision regarding the EU continued in Tbilisi for the 40th day despite the holiday. Those who wanted to celebrate Christmas in a demonstration gathered in front of the parliament building at night. The demonstrators, carrying EU and Georgian flags and candles for the holiday, marched through the streets of Tbilisi. They closed Shota Rustaveli Avenue in front of the parliament, calling for new parliamentary elections. The European Union, United States, former Georgian President Salome Zurabishvili and the opposition do not accept the parliamentary elections won by the ruling Georgian Dream Party and are reacting to the government's suspension of the start of EU accession negotiations. The United States and some European countries have imposed sanctions on Georgian government officials.
For more on the situation in Georgia, we go to Tbilisi and our Leila Rahimli.
Hello from Tbilisi. This is a live update for our viewers in Baku, bringing you the latest developments in Georgia's political landscape. First, French President Emmanuel Macron has emphasized support for democracy and freedom in Georgia as a priority of France's foreign policy. Speaking at a conference, Macron highlighted Russia's interference in Georgia's electoral process, praised the courage of the demonstrators, and suggested that new elections could help resolve the ongoing political crisis. Following his remarks, the French ambassador to Georgia, Sheraz Gasri, repeated these points, commending previous President Salome Zurabishvili's role in this process. However, the ruling Georgian Dream Party has strongly criticized these statements. Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze dismissed Macron's comments as interference, saying the French president should focus on Ukraine, which face destruction, instead of spreading lies about Georgia. Parliament Speaker Shalva Popashvili added to the criticism, pointing to France's domestic challenge, where he claims many citizens are dissatisfied with Macron's leadership, suggesting that new election in France might be more appropriate. The opposition, however, views the international attention as validation of their demands. Pro-European protests in Tbilisi have gained momentum, with thousands calling for new elections. Meanwhile, international organizations are stepping back down, raises their approach to Georgia. The OCA Parliamentary Assembly President Pia Kauma postponed her visit to Tbilisi, originally scheduled for January 8 and 10. In her statement, Kauma said she would wait for a more effective time to visit, while reaffirming the OCA's readiness to assist Georgia in implementing electoral reforms. U.S. Congressman Joy Wilson supported this decision, stating that a visit now could risk legitimizing what he calls an autocratic regime. On January 9, an international panel will focus on Georgia's current challenge. Participants including previous President Salome Zurabishvili, Congressman Joy Wilson, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO Kurt Volker, and other prominent figures. The event, scheduled for 10 a.m. local time, is expected to address the growing concerns about democracy and governance in Georgia. Despite criticism from the opposition and international observers, Georgian Dream leaders remain steadfast. They argue that the protesters are politically motivated and accuse Western figures of supporting destabilization. The protests, now entering a critical phase, reflect the deep divide within Georgian society, with opposition groups and protesters amplifying their calls for change, and the government rejects what is seen as foreign interference. The coming weeks could be pivotal for Georgia's political trajectory. And that's the latest updates for now. I am Leyla Rahimli, reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
On the developments in Georgia, blacklisting of its officials and protests, we're talking to George Mchedlishvili, political expert, coming to us live from Tbilisi. Hi, George. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with the sanctions lists. Dozens of the ruling Georgian Dream Party members are under sanctions from the US and EU member countries. Washington recently added the party's honorary chairman, Bidzina Ivanishvili, to the list as well. Earlier, the Baltic states sanctioned officials, including the PM, Irakli Kobakhidze. What kind of an effect could these measures prove to have, and would you say that Georgian officials worry about them?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. So before I start answering, I just want to start by offering my heartfelt condolences to the victims of the families and to the Azerbaijani people because of this terrible tragedy that happened in the skies a few weeks ago when this plane was shot down. That was a terrible tragedy, and I hope very much that the justice will prevail in this regard. So as far as Georgia is concerned, obviously, the latest trends of sanctioning Georgian officials, it is a very worrying trend. Well, in the first place, so all normative considerations aside, it will affect Georgian economy in no uncertain terms, in a pretty meaningful way. We will feel the crunch in the several months, because the sanction involve financial assets and, well, particularly when it comes to the honorary chairman. And of course, it has very serious political connotation, political undertone, because Georgia and the United States for decades used to be staunch, very strong allies. So Georgia was considered to be a major foothold of the United States in that region, along with some other countries. But Georgia was like pretty much a favorite child of the United States for decades, and of course it has a very strong symbolic power. But on the other hand, it just shows that Georgia has significantly disappointed the Western partners, the countries which have been helping Georgia for those 3 decades in its statehood, in its democratic development. So Georgian state and its current status of the candidate member to the European Union, it of course it comes as a result of significant cooperation, of thorough and multifaceted cooperation, like between the Western countries and institutions and Georgia. And of course, the current trade is extremely worrying to me and to many Georgian citizens as well.
Staying on this subject of Western so-called reactions, what do you make of the OSCE delegation headed by the president of its parliamentary assembly canceling its planned visit to Georgia? When the visit was announced, it was met with harsh criticism by the opposition.
Well, I believe that visits like this should happen nonetheless, notwithstanding concerns and misunderstanding. But at the end of the day, the decision is conditioned by the almost damning report of the OSCE ODIHR mission, which was stationed in Georgia for the election on the October 26th. It took them about 2 months to issue the final report, which was not very complimentary to say the least. It reported a number of cases of voter intimidation, and generally, so many cases, many issues that negatively impacted the integrity of the election and the trust. So therefore, yes, these elections were by a large margin the worst that Georgia has held over the past decades. No elections, to be honest, no elections were perfect. So every incumbent, every government, every leadership tries to mobilize administrative resources, but these particular elections were particularly negative. Again, after all, Georgia was given a low passing grade, but that is no match. This is like it is not becoming of the country which is already the candidate member of the European Union. The country with the candidate status should hold a much better election. So therefore, it is understandable. Although I believe that the dialogue should not cease, it should happen, and there is still a chance, I believe, for political settlement, be it a renewed election or some other settlement.
Exactly. Dialogue could be the solution as the protests passed their 40-day mark. The fifth president, Salome Zurabishvili, said that the protests will go on until a new election is held. Do you see any possibility for a snap election to happen? Do you see the opposition and the government coming to a deal?
Well, today the deal seems impossible again, but I try to be optimistic. Generally inherently optimistic, and on several occasions, the situation in Georgia was resolved. Okay, it was an imperfect resolution. It was actually it was based on compromise. It was still again imperfect, but still it was possible up to this point. But today, both sides, both parties seem to be really determined, recalcitrant, and not willing to concede an inch. So today it seems very unlikely, but again, it will depend significantly on how the sanctions bite. If sanctions bite is significant and within a couple of months, maybe the authorities will concede the ground and announce the snap election. But today, they seem to be pretty stable. They have financially, institutionally, in terms of actually kind of the state apparatus work so far, it seemed to be well oiled. And again, today seems unlikely. But if Georgian politics teaches something, if you can derive any lesson, that there are so many unpredictable variables, and situation might change overnight. It has happened several times, and I think that couple of new factors might affect the outcome.
Zurabishvili has asked for Western help and support to the pro-EU demonstrators. On the other side, the Georgian Dream said earlier it will coordinate with the incoming administration of Donald Trump. What is to be expected from Trump's administration when it comes to Georgia?
Well, it has been the popular narrative of the Georgian Dream over the past, I would say, 2-3 years, particularly over the past several months. What their narrative, to put it long story short, is that when the Trump administration comes to power on the January 20th, everything will settle, everything will return to the back to the normal, back to the business as usual, because they are much healthier. They are not demanding something of Georgia which is not to the Georgian character. So they will not pressure the incumbents as the Biden administration was pressuring. So they are far more healthy and far more cooperative in this regard.
Thank you,
But
George.
it remains to be seen. So how this prediction plays out. So well, it's hard to predict, really.
George, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and opinions.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a good day.
In the heart of capital of Azerbaijan, Baku, where traditions and cultures blend seamlessly, Orthodox Christians gathered to celebrate Christmas.
Orthodox Christians are observing their sacred celebration and traditions in the Holy Mir Bearers Cathedral in Baku, Azerbaijan. For many of them, this is the time of prayer, reflection, and community. Christmas is a time to come together, celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, and pray for peace and unity. Churches are beautifully decorated with candles and icons, and the sound of sacred hymns fills the air as worshippers come together in prayer and celebration. Each year, prayers and liturgical services are held in Orthodox churches across the country, providing an opportunity for the faithful to gather in worship and ask for peace and health. The celebration begins on the evening of January 6 with a solemn liturgy. Worshippers fast until the first star appears, symbolizing the Star of Bethlehem that guided the wise men. Orthodox Christians in Baku celebrate not just the birth of Christ, but also the spirit of unity and hope that this holiday brings.
Now to Sudan, where the war is worsening the humanitarian situation by the day. Hundreds of thousands have already sought refuge in the region. Our Naba Muheddin brings the latest on the conflict from Port Sudan.
The Sudanese army says it rebelled a fresh attack launched by the RSF in the east and southwest of Al-Fashir. Clashes between the two sides in Al-Fashir had died down over the last few weeks, but reports say the RSF continued bombarding civilian and military targets there. Attacks using heavy artillery and drones were reported, and again, according to reports, there have been a large number of civilian casualties. The joint force have also deployed large troops to the border areas with Libya in recent months, after intercepting two convoys accompanied by Libyan and apparently Colombian mercenaries. Al-Fashir is the last stronghold of the Sudanese army and the joint force since the onset of war, but the RSF controls 4 out of Darfur's states. Hundreds of thousands of displaced people have fled to the area, and the humanitarian crisis is deepening. Despite the mounting calls by the international community to cease the hostilities in Al-Fashir, fighting has not stopped. Naba Muheddin for News in Port Sudan.
Tech innovators from around the world gathered in Las Vegas for the Consumer Electronics Show, showcasing the latest in AI, VR, and health tech. However, concerns over new tariffs announced by Donald Trump are casting a shadow over the event.
At CES 2025 in Las Vegas, tech innovators are unveiling the newest gadgets aimed at transforming everyday life. The health tech is making a splash with products like a device designed to help the elderly maintain muscle strength by simulating yoga movements.
This is particularly good for elderly and patients that cannot work out on their own or work out independently. So just like this, up and down. The arms go up till 95-degree angle and legs go up 96-degree angle.
Meanwhile, virtual reality and AI tools continue to push the boundaries of immersive experiences. HoloConnect is demonstrating how AI and holograms can revolutionize communication, allowing remote employees and loved ones to interact as if they were in the same room.
Yeah, well, we use it for educational purposes. Imagine having a teacher being presented from one centralized location where I stand, but being presented in like 10 or 20 locations, doing a class and having feedback with students in those 20 locations. And And we also now have new customers, which are like customers that use it as a home device to bring in their mother, to bring in their daughter or a loved one as a live hologram into their room.
Among the highlights in the Robot, an AI robotic pet that mimics a real dog, responding to touch and even recognizing its owner.
This is the robot, and the name is robot, means the AI robotic pet. It's like a real cat dog. You can touch it, it will feel your touching, and it can recognize you and recognize all kinds of items. If you can try to build some long-term relationship with human beings, it knows who is friend, who is strangers, and try to play with you.
However, as tech companies push forward with these innovations, they face a growing uncertainty. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on imports from China, Mexico and Canada are a major concern, especially for automakers. Honda has warned that permanent tariffs could force them to reconsider their production strategies, potentially shifting more operations to the US in an effort to avoid higher import costs. Industry experts worry these tariffs could disrupt the global supply chain and increase the price of new technology.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thanks for watching and stay tuned.